The outbreak of World War II. World War II Part 1, the European Theatre. Just a background to World War II, after World War I, most European countries were in economic depression. Millions of people were homeless, had no jobs, money or food, which led to the rise of dictators in Europe like Hitler, Stalin and Mussolini. All of them promised an end to their nation's problem, which led to people trusting them and led to these leaders quickly growing in popularity. An example is Hitler, who grew in popularity in the 1920s and finally became the Führer of Germany in 1934, following which he actively sought to expand his power in and outside of Germany. This is a photo of the front cover of the newspaper on the day Britain and France declared war on Germany when Hitler invaded Poland on 3rd September 1939. Here's a quick recap on Poland and its importance to Hitler. Poland was created after World War I. It's actually a land that was taken away from Germany after World War I in the Treaty of Versailles. It's significant to Germany because majority of ethnic Germans lived in Poland and had an important port, Danzig. It kept East and West Prussia separated, thereby weakening Germany. There are three main reasons for the outbreak of World War II. 1. Weakness of the League of Nations. 2. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy. 3. The policy of appeasement. The League of Nations was generally considered to be weak as they failed to meet the main objectives of why they were set up in the first place, to ensure disarmament and to stop the rise of aggressive powers. There have been a couple of attempts at disarmament like the Washington Naval Conference, the Locarno Treaties and the Kilbride Pact in the 1920s, and the World Disarmament Conference in 1930s, all aiming to get the world to be more at peace with one another by having lower levels of arms. However, the League was largely unsuccessful as members were largely not willing to disarm for fear of threats and also lack of international trust. This failure to ensure disarmament led to the rise of powerful countries. Hence, the failure of disarmament was damaging to the League's reputation in Germany. Germany was forced into disarming, yet no other countries had done so to the same extent. The League thus lost the needed respect and authority. At the same time, the League also couldn't stop the rise of aggressive powers. And this could be seen in the case study of the Abyssinian Crisis. Abyssinia had common borders with British colonies and was also much closer to Europe. There were therefore more reasons for the League of Nations to intervene when Italy invaded Abyssinia in 1935. However, the main issue is that Britain and France failed to take the event seriously, partly because they wanted to buy more time. Because of these behaviors showcased by Britain and France, this made Mussolini believe that Britain and France would ignore the event. Even though the League reported that either country was not wrong and proposed to give some of Abyssinia to Italy, this idea was rejected, and Mussolini eventually launched a full-scale invasion of Abyssinia, which goes against whatever League of Nations had been trying to push out for to the rest of the member countries. The League of Nations imposed economic sanctions on the sale of arms on Italy, as well as loans and exports such as rubber, tin and metals. However, the issue here is that sanctions were not carried out wholeheartedly because Britain and France eventually secretly gave Mussolini 2/3 of Abyssinia in return for him to call off the invasion. The fact that Britain and France did not cooperate with the economic sanctions given out by the League of Nations and went behind the League's back to come up with a secret agreement with Mussolini is a huge disgrace to the League of Nations, and this led to Italy's takeover of Abyssinia in May 1936. You would see in this timeline that the Abyssinian Crisis was not the only event in which the League or even the permanent members of the League failed to stop. All of these events were an indication of the League's weakness to stop any form of aggression. This would then serve to embolden Hitler and encourage him in pursuing his expansionist policy as seen here. Hitler rapidly expanded Germany's strength in the 1930s. But to be honest, he did not hide his plans for Germany and made it very obvious in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler's three main aims were to 1. Abolish the Treaty of Versailles, because to him and to the Germans, the Treaty of Versailles is a constant reminder for the Germans of their humiliation. Hitler refused to acknowledge that Germany had lost in World War I and wanted to find a way to make Germany stronger again. 2. He wanted to expand Germany's territory, and he wanted to house Germany's growing population by establishing Lebensraum, or a living space. He also believed that he could enslave the Slavic race or the East Europeans. At the same time, he wanted to defeat communism. He was worried about the potential attack from Russia because Russia was responsible for Germany's defeat in World War I. With the main aim of restoring Germany's pride and strength, Hitler rolled out his rearmament program. After withdrawing from the League of Nations, Hitler actively built on getting more weapons and increased the number of soldiers, because he knew that he needed a strong army to get more land and to fight against communism. Which is why in 1933, Hitler announced that he was increasing the size of the German army from 100,000 men to 300,000 men. In 1935, he further increased the size of the army to 550,000 men and reintroduced conscription for all male citizens. While he is doing all of this, Hitler kept emphasizing that he was committed to peace to allay the Allies' fear. Since the Allies were in a pacifist mood, they only made verbal protests, and Hitler was free to transform Germany into a formidable and dangerous military power. Following that, Hitler then remilitarized Rhineland, which is a clear act of going against the Treaty of Versailles, because according to the Treaty of Versailles, Germany should not be placing troops in Rhineland. Germany was unhappy that Rhineland was occupied by the French, and also because French had taken away the resources from Rhineland. Hence, in 1936, Hitler ordered 3 battalions of troops to march into Rhineland. However, this is some sort of a litmus test, because the instructions given to the troops were that they were to retreat only if they were fired upon. So in a way or another, Hitler was expecting a form of a reaction from Britain and France. However, no actions were taken against the troops. Why? Because, first of all, France was not willing to act without British support. British claimed that the Germans were merely marching into its own backyard. At the same time, France was about to have election, and no politician at that point of time wanted to be seen as wanting to start a war. Secondly, the League of Nations was distracted by the Abyssinian Crisis and didn't have enough bandwidth to handle Hitler at this point of time. So this is a map of Hitler's progress. You would realize that the purple shaded is actually Rhineland. At this point of time, Hitler managed to get Rhineland. Hitler made it clear that he felt Germany and Austria belonged together and pushed for an Anschluss or a union with Austria. This was yet another violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The reason why Germany was not allowed to reunify together with Austria because it was meant to prevent Germany from becoming the biggest and the most powerful country in Central Europe. Hitler had the intention of making Austria part of the Greater Germany. In 12 February 1938, Hitler tried to take control of Austria by threatening the Chancellor that he will send his army to Austria if he did not agree to the Anschluss. So at this point, the Chancellor planned a plebiscite or a political vote. Realizing that this could work against him, Hitler prepared for an invasion, and on 12 March 1938, German troops marched into Austria. 10 April 1938, the plebiscite was taken, and 99.75% of Austrians voted for Anschluss. Hence, Germany achieved Anschluss without much conflict, and Austria's resources of gold and iron ore were now at Hitler's disposal, as were its army and weapons. So at this point here, not only did he have Rhineland, he also had Austria. So you would realize that the sheer size of Germany itself is starting to increase slowly. Hitler then made an agreement that shocked the world with the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The Nazi-Soviet Pact is an agreement between Germany and Soviet Union that was signed on 23 August 1939. It shocked the world as this was an impossible alliance. Who would ever imagine that Hitler and Stalin would actually come together to work at agreement and to agree on these terms? They agreed not to go to war with one another. They promised to split Poland between themselves and promised to invade Poland together. So in short, it was a marriage on convenience for both parties. Why? Because it bought time for Stalin to rearm in the event that Hitler should invade Russia. So at this point of time, Stalin was aware of whatever that was currently happening in Europe, and he didn't trust Hitler. So he knew that he needed time to rearm and bought time by coming up to an agreement with Hitler. Stalin could also gain Poland when he allied with Hitler. It also benefited Hitler because Hitler would not have to face a two-front war with the Nazi-Soviet pact. So from here we can see that Hitler's expansionist policy led to World War II as Hitler's desire to form a greater Germany and create living space for his people. It is this desire that prompted him to pursue an expansionist foreign policy and go against the Treaty of Versailles and expand Germany's military capabilities. He had a desire to create a large German empire and unite all German-speaking people together. Therefore, when Hitler came to power, he stepped up the rearmament program and the conscription program. This explains why Nazis' foreign policy after 1934 was geared towards expansion in the East and achieving Lebensraum, especially in Czechoslovakia and Poland. In 1938, he demanded that Sudetenland to be returned to Germany from independent Czechoslovakia, which was then followed by its annexation of Czechoslovakia in 1939. By pursuing remilitarization, Hitler was able to strengthen his military power. This led to a build-up of Germany's military capabilities that enabled Hitler to put his expansionist plan into action and thus threaten European peace. Such actions threatened European peace in the 1930s and worried Britain and France that Hitler was uncontrollable and might inevitably cause World War in the long run. Thus, they had to take actions to put a stop to Hitler's actions eventually, although it might have taken quite a bit of time for them to actually react. But here's the thing, right? At this point, why didn't the Allied powers say anything? This is because they were actually practicing the policy of appeasement. Now, what is appeasement? Appeasement is when one country tries to avoid war by giving in to what the other country wants. The policy was adopted by Britain and France in the 1930s towards Germany. Britain Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was the main man responsible for this policy because he was hoping that this was an alternative way to achieve peace without the League of Nations. This is because politicians like him actually believed that Hitler was reasonable and believed that by giving in to Hitler, they could stop him from bringing the world into war. So why did they choose to adopt the policy of appeasement then? Firstly, they really didn't want to enter another war. They had a bad memory of World War I, which led to destructions and millions of young men killed in World War I. So they thought that if they were to give in, they might satisfy Hitler, Hitler will stop expanding, and this would then prevent another war, which to them was worth the move. To be honest, at the same time, Britain was preoccupied with her own economic problems. Britain's economy was badly damaged by World War II and suffered also from the Great Depression. So at this point in time, she really needed to focus on herself, focus on rebuilding herself, and could not afford to go into another war. At the same time, they also wanted to buy time. Germany had modernized its military and industry by the mid-1930s, but Britain and France, not exactly. They knew that they were not ready, and they knew that they needed to buy time to modernize their armies. There were also some politicians who felt that whatever Hitler was doing was rather justified and that he was quite a nationalistic person. So there were politicians who felt that the Treaty of Versailles was unfair to Germany. To them, whatever Hitler was doing was just to make the treaty a fairer one. and Hitler and Germany would become a peaceful nation once their problems were solved. At this point of time, they were also fearful of communism. They thought that communism is a far greater threat than Nazism. Their opinion is that by keeping Germany strong, this will prevent communism from spreading to Central and Western Europe. There were also problems with empires. Empires had insufficient troops to keep colonies in order, and they really couldn't afford to fight another war in Europe against Germany. So how did the appeasement policy work? How it actually works can actually be seen in a case study of the Sudetenland crisis. In September 1938, after Germany invaded Austria, it was evident that Hitler will do the same to Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. It's because he despised the Czech people. The Czechoslovakia was also a prosperous country that was rich in resources that Hitler really wanted, like coal and iron ore. He also wanted to pursue his dream to bring Germans together to form a greater Germany. This then leads to the Munich Agreement. Hitler eyed Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia for its key resources such as iron and ore, as mentioned previously. So in May 1938, Hitler announced that he would go to war for Sudetenland if necessary, which is why Chamberlain decided to arrange a meeting with Hitler in the form of the Munich Conference to make a last attempt to avoid war if possible. This led to the Munich Conference being held in 15 September 1938. There, Hitler demanded for parts of Sudetenland initially, and he would only do so if a plebiscite showed that the Sudetenland people or the Sudeten Germans wanted to join Germany. But later on, Hitler changed his mind and increased his demands. He claimed that he regretted the previously arranged terms because they were insufficient. Now, he wanted all of Sudetenland, because he claimed that the Czech government was mistreating the Germans in Sudetenland, and he wanted to rescue the Germans by 1st of October. So in 29 September 1938, the final meeting was finally arranged to decide on the fate of Sudetenland or to go to war. Britain, Germany, France and Italy met without USSR and announced that Czechoslovakia would lose Sudetenland. But this, if you think about it, it's not really very fair because the Czechs were not consulted. Sudetenland was given to Hitler without firing a shot, which led to the leader of Czechoslovakia resigning. This also led to a joint declaration between Britain and Germany on 30 September. So, did Chamberlain really save the day? Actually, the answer is no, because the peace did not last long. On 15 March 1939, Hitler invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia, going against whatever he initially agreed with Chamberlain. At this point, Hitler's expansionistic ambitions are getting more obvious as he's clearly moving away from German-speaking territories. The eastern part of Czech are not German-speaking. The invasion of Poland was an immediate reason for World War II. In 1 September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. His reasoning is that he wanted Danzig to be part of Germany and wanted to build a railroad to link the east and west of Germany through the Polish corridor. As there were little justifications for Hitler to invade Poland, war was declared on Germany, because at this point of time, it was very clear to Britain and France that nothing would satisfy Hitler and he's just merely expanding his power again and again. So, based on the color coding here, you would realize that this is currently Hitler's progress. With all the color codes, including the original size of Germany, you would realize that Hitler's expansionistic policies has led to him increasing the size of Germany's boundaries. So how and why did the appeasement policy lead to World War II? Is because the appeasement policy was a weak policy by aggressors. It was deemed as a weak policy by aggressors, especially Hitler. The fact that Britain and France continued to tolerate his military expansion led him to believe that they would not take any military actions against him. As such, he became emboldened and became braver and braver, and he started to take more and more aggressive actions against Poland, for example. In this case, the British and French no longer believed that he would keep to his words that Czechoslovakia would be his last demand. They eventually accepted the fact that Hitler could never be pacified. Thus, Neville Chamberlain declared war on Hitler on 3rd September 1939.